Pew! 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 Pew!
G'day, Steve from Steve M Outdoors, and today we're going to be discussing the M91 PU scope and sniper rifle. To start, a bit of a retread from my M91 video. The M91 Mosin Nagant is the longest continuously serving rifle in history, stretching from 1891 when it was introduced into service in Tsarist Russia, essentially to today. You can still find it in use in conflicts around the world, the Ukraine, Crimea, I suppose that's the same thing, the Middle East, a whole bunch of places. Now, it's 9130, so obviously the /30 means that it was upgraded in 1930. Minor adjustments were made, sights, that sort of thing. And it essentially became then the rifle that served the Soviet Union during World War II. So M91 model of 1891/30. So the battle doctrine of the Soviet Union has always emphasized volume of fire, primarily after World War II, especially with the introduction of the AK-47. But starting in early 1930s, there was a sharpshooters movement that began in the country, and the Soviet Army recognized the need for a precision rifle. A few years later, in 1938, Soviet snipers were used in the Battle of Lake Kazan against troops of the Imperial Japanese Army. So once they made the decision to move forward, the Russians were, the Soviets were all in. So entering in World War II, the Soviets did have a sniper rifle based on the M91 but it used what was called the PE scope. And it was a 4-power magnification scope, and essentially a copy of a German design by Zeiss. The picture that you see now, one way or the other, find out in editing which side it will go on, is famed Russian sniper Vasily Zaitsev. He's using a Mosin variant in that picture and has a PE scope. And as you can see, compared to the standard PU scope, the PE scope is quite a bit longer. Now, the problem for the Soviets was that while the PE scope was an excellent in quality scope, German designed of course, it was also complicated to manufacture, which is not a good thing when you have to outfit millions of men rapidly, and particularly tens to hundreds of thousands of sniper rifles in short order. It's not an easy task under any circumstances. When you have a complicated and slightly more expensive design, it really eats up resources fast, even a scope. So, now you also have to remember at the start of World War II, the M91 was essentially 5 decades old and hardly bleeding edge technology. And at the same time, the Soviets introduced the SVT-40. A semi-automatic rifle, which they intended on serving both as a standard infantryman's rifle and as a sniper rifle. In 1940, they introduced the PU scope. The acronym means scope shortcut, both to replace the expensive and complicated PE and PEM scopes, and to serve as the scope of a new sniper system built around the SVT-40. It had 3.5-power magnification, and it was easier to manufacture in volume. It was a fairly simple scope. Unfortunately, the sniper version of the SVT was plagued with accuracy problems, most notably that the first shot often didn't hit where the rifle was zeroed, and then follow-up shots kind of did. Sounds great, but when you need to make that first shot, which is the whole point of a sniper rifle, it's not particularly acceptable. So the project was shelved. Now, assuming that you can tell a former SVT sniper assuming it's not fake, that is, you can tell an SVT sniper rifle by there being a notch at the back of the receiver where the assembly piece for the scope was anchored. They are difficult to find though, and they're pretty expensive. If you find a legitimate one, I suggest you pick it up because they don't fall out of the trees. So that left the Soviets with a bit of a problem. They still needed a sniper rifle in mass quantities, and they didn't have one. So in 1942, the Soviets began putting a slightly modified version of the PU scope on the M9130. And thus was born the M9130 PU sniper rifle. Now, the rifle did see some enhancements from the basic M9130, including a recalibrated rear sight, which wasn't really used that often, but you can co-witness, that is, you can use the regular iron sights because they are underneath the scope assembly. So they redesigned the rear scope sights slightly. From what was called arshins, which is a Russian measurement of distance approximating the stride of an average soldier, and they changed that to meters because, well, that's what everyone uses. The barrel length was also slightly reduced, and reinforced sling slots, which you'll see at the back. It's a slot rather than hanging from the bottom of the rifle. Those were replaced. They replaced swivels on the previous models. So the scope has a European 3-post setup, and once again, on one side of me or the other, you're going to see a picture of the sight picture, or the scope picture. And in the hands of a good shooter, it was actually certainly capable of hitting a man-sized target at anywhere from 600 to 800 meters away, which is pretty impressive for the time in a relatively lower-powered scope. It had a stellar service record in World War II, and it was used by famous snipers, and I'm going to read the names here because Russian. Klevdaya Kalugina, Ludmila Pavlichenko, and Vasily Kavachantiradze. You'll notice that the first two names are women's names. The women had about 2,000 women serving as snipers in World War II, and they were damn good. I believe it was Ludmila Pavlichenko who actually did a tour of the United States during World War II to raise money and raise awareness, and her and Eleanor Roosevelt got along quite famously. So the combination of the M9130 and the PU sniper rifle remained in service with the communist bloc all the way up until the 1960s, when it was replaced by the SVT Dragunov. It's estimated that about 300,000 M9130 PU sniper rifles were manufactured between 1942 and 1958. Now, interestingly, the Soviets also did some experimentation with the PU scope by attaching it to a PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle. Unfortunately, I don't have any information as to how successful it was, and I kind of find it hard to believe that the scope, as well made and as solid as it is, would actually survive very long on a rifle that, and then let me read this, fires a 14.5 by 114 millimeter cartridge. That's fairly substantial. So, as a scope, I have to admit I'm fairly impressed with the PU. Although it was manufactured 70 years ago, and I've used scopes of similar magnifications that were manufactured in 2015, it's actually got pretty clear glass, which is important when you're trying to hit a target a long way off. I tend to shoot anywhere out to about 200 yards. So, I mean, I don't really push the rifle that much, but it's very good for what it is. You can find the rifles along with a ton of fakes, which is essentially PU scopes put on rifles that may or may not have been actual sniper rifles, reasonably easily from anywhere from about $700 to $1,000, depending on the quality and condition. Accuracy is pretty good. If you have an actual sniper rifle, which I do, and I find it a lot more fun to shoot than a regular M9130. And that's really basically about it. It's a great rifle. I enjoy it. It's, you know, is it the greatest sniper rifle of World War II? You know, I don't know. A lot of people like the Lee Enfield rifles that were sniper rifles. And the Germans had some fairly nice rifles that we'll touch upon in future episodes of SM Outdoors. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Feel free to like this video if you enjoyed it, that is, and maybe you didn't. Feel free to subscribe to both my Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, and all the links are in the description below. And as always, happy shooting, safe shooting.